Hello, and welcome to The Charge Cycle, an electrifying new podcast on all things fleet electrification. I'm Todd Trauman, I'm the CEO of Emission Control. If you are a procurement manager, a fleet operator, or one of the millions of people tasked with a zero-emission deployment goal, this podcast is for you. We speak with industry experts, funding experts, OEMs, and many others to help you stay ahead of this enormous electrification shift underway. Hello, welcome back to another episode of The Charge Cycle. I'm Todd Trauman, I'm the CEO of Emission Control. Back again today with Connor Whaley, EMC's OEM and Strategic Partnerships Manager. Connor, what's up?
How you doing?
Doing good, thanks. Hey, I know that both of us are very excited to bring on Sarah Booth today. She's the COO of Sawatch, and she's a clean energy expert with a long history at the National Renewable Energy Labs, Sonoma Clean Power, and now it seems like about a 5-year stint at Sawatch. So, Sarah, welcome to The Charge Cycle.
Thank you, Todd and Connor. Really excited to be here.
Cool. Well, I love hearing about the history of people before they get to their existing job roles. To give us a little bit of your life journey that led you all the way to Sawatch.
Yeah, so I was born in northern Minnesota. No, I do. I will say, I am a northern Minnesota desert rat because I grew up in Arizona. But I started in the clean energy space about 15 years ago. You mentioned that I worked at the National Renewable Energy Lab, or NREL. And there I got to do a lot of work with mostly local and state governments that were trying to figure out how to put policies in place to drive investment in clean energy technology. And at the time, that was mostly renewable energy and energy efficiency, because the transportation options in terms of technologies, vehicles that were available, electric vehicles just weren't really available to anybody. That just wasn't there. So they were kind of starting there, but we weren't doing a lot on it. There I also got exposed to, one, how much data is out there, and then how much data is out there, but people don't know it's out there, or they don't know how to access it. And so I got to work on tools that were helping to make that data really, really easy for policymakers and decision makers to find, so they could get back to doing the job they needed to do. I don't know if you've dug through the Energy Information Administration's amazing data set at all, but it is hard to find what you need, but it is really, really valuable data. So after that, I consulted on my own, did a lot of work with international non-government organizations and the federal government, and then Sawatch approached me. And I was not interested in leaving consulting on my own. I had a lot of flexibility, loved my clients, but they had me hooked in about 10 minutes, because what they did and what they were building was a software that could help take that data that was there that people couldn't access and help people make really informed decisions using that data. And so it just tapped into what I really love doing. And I joined about 4.5-5 years ago. And now we're just kind of running like crazy here at Sawatch.
So when you were consulting on your own, were you also heavily focused on non-transportation related activities as well? And what was Sawatch's activity, were they focused on transportation that drew you in, or what was the kind of the real interest in moving, I guess, maybe slightly in a different direction in the renewable energy world?
Yeah, I wasn't doing much in transportation, kind of still tangentially like I had been previously, but in my days at NREL, I got exposed enough, and I was always really excited about what's coming in transportation. And so when Sawatch approached me, everything that we've done at Sawatch has been very much focused on fleet and transportation. When they approached me, I was like, this is intriguing. This is what's coming next. This is where people are having a hard time trying to make the right decisions, and we can help them do that quickly with data. And in some ways, it felt like renewables is not solved. Energy efficiency is not solved. There's a lot of really cool technologies coming on the market out there, but there are a lot of people working in that space. And so there's so much innovation happening in transportation that I think it just piqued my interest. And I know a lot of people that were in solar 15, 20 years ago that are like, jump into the transportation side because EVs are exciting.
Super exciting. I totally agree. We've hosted several folks too that have come with a renewable energy background that are now heavily invested and deeply involved in the transportation space, as are we. So it makes a lot of sense. So so that was about 5 years ago, I think, at this point, you said. And so give us a little background on Sawatch. I know you're not a founder specifically, but I mean, being 5 years invested in a company like that, I mean, you've seen quite a bit. So tell us a little bit maybe about the company's history, if you can, of what you know about it. And then tell us kind of what you've been doing over the last 5 years.
Yeah, so I was the first employee and consulted prior to officially being an employee. So been around
pretty much a founder.
Since, yeah, not a founder, but since the beginning or near the beginning. I would say our origin story is really that we're all data nerds, which you can see then why I was attracted to the role. The CEO, if we go back kind of before Sawatch Labs was Sawatch Labs, our CEO, Matthew Helm, he's a software developer and he was doing a lot of work in the vehicle telemetry space, in building phone apps around how you pull in this data, and started modeling fuel and energy use. And from there, it became quickly apparent that once you can model that on the existing vehicle, you could then see, well, what does that look like if I use a different fuel source? So if I drive a gas-powered vehicle, what does it look like if I did those same trips in an electric vehicle, which is really where Sawatch got started. About that same time, the U.S. Department of Energy came to the precursor to Sawatch and said, hey, we have this Smart Cities Challenge, and we have a bunch of cities that have applied. And they've given us their fleet data, and we need to try and select which one we're going to award as the winner of this program and the grant funding and everything else that came with that. And here's the annual vehicle miles traveled, or the annual VMT. Tell us which one would be the best. And it's like, well, we could do some economic analysis on that. We could say, would you save money or not if we get down to the vehicle by vehicle analysis? But we cannot tell you if an EV will meet your daily operational needs. And so that aligned really well with that vehicle telemetry data and modeling the energy needed every single day. And then we got an opportunity to do some work with the National Renewable Energy Lab with 5 other fleets around the country, which really proved out the value of the software we were building, as well as the demand and the interest from the fleets that we worked with. And so from there, we just kind of grew and grew and grew. And now it's 5 years later, and we're doing a lot of work in the EV space, helping fleets use their data to make a smart decision. Also, use their data to understand when an EV will not work, because we think that's really important too. Don't put one in a bad use case.
See, that's the question that I get all of the time. It's always, okay, so which ones can I electrify? But also everyone's saying, I can't electrify this one. Or, the range for this vehicle is just not going to meet this route. And that's just constantly on a loop every single day. Everyone's asking those same questions. So it's almost more important to know which one shouldn't I spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to electrify, and then spending as many resources as I can on the optimal kind of routes and the vehicles that can actually be electrified today using today's technology, and also looking at the routes that could be the most economic and the most profitable for an EV. And could you talk a little bit about kind of you mentioned the energy model on looking things beyond just the VMT. What kind of attributes are you actually taking into account in that energy model? Are you looking at routes? Are you looking at elevation? What kind of data do you actually use to make these models?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Telematics, which my husband is sick of me saying that word because I say it all the time. I didn't know it before I joined Sawatch. So that's the data on the vehicles on how they're operating, right? So there's the GPS trace, and then of course there is the data that's coming off the engine. Now, what we're looking for that energy model is that GPS trace. We're looking at speed. It's not just how many miles did they drive each day, it's what type of energy, how much energy was needed to do those types of miles. We like to say not all miles are created equal, right? A mile in stop and go traffic is very different in terms of the energy use in a gas powered vehicle than it is for an EV. And the same goes for highway and up a hill and down a hill. So all of that, elevation, yes, temperature as well, obviously has an impact on both, but we hear a lot about it in the EV space, and you want to know what that looks like. So we incorporate all of that into then understanding how much energy do you need throughout the day. It doesn't really matter how many miles if an energy need is higher than what that battery can provide.
So I just want to back up a little bit, just understanding the origination of the company and doing some of the modeling and working through the kind of the climate challenge work there. But can you explain kind of how that's evolved into the actual platforms? Like, what are the software platforms that you guys are offering, and maybe give us the quick spiel of exactly what kind of customers you work with and what the tools are that you guys use?
Yeah, certainly. So we have our 2 primary software products, our companion products. There's ezEV and ezIO. And ezEV is what we use to do the EV suitability assessment. We look at each vehicle, again, down to that, minute by minute operations, and then say, 1, will your vehicle, if you replace this with an EV, will you save money? Yes or no? Will your driver need midday charging? Yes or no? Where will your infrastructure need to be? And are you parked there long enough to charge as much as you need every day? I'm oversimplifying that, but we do scores at each of those levels to help you understand what those operational and economic impacts will be, which ones are easy wins, which ones may be in the gray area, which ones are definitely too difficult right now. The companion product ezIO, or Infrastructure Optimizer, is where we aggregate that charging data then across all of those vehicles. And we can say, what will that demand curve look like based on every single facility where those vehicles are? So for 365 days a year, every single day, based on when the vehicle arrived back at the facility, was done for the day, how much energy they would have used during the day, how much would they need to charge that evening, what time would they be done charging? And so we we aggregate those demands and then provide a 15-minute demand curve to help our fleets figure out how many ports do they need, what level of charging do they need for these vehicles, and what does it look like at 5% fleet electrification, 20% fleet electrification, stepping all the way up to 100%. So you can plan for your next 1 or 2 procurement cycles, but you can also look at whatever your big 2030, 2040 goals are. So keep that in mind when you're building out that infrastructure.
Yeah, that's a problem that we see frequently is people maybe are starting to work through some of the vehicle analytics and vehicle turnover opportunities, but then don't really think about the load until it's too late, or understand, what is actually going to be required, not just now, but again, in the next decade of their overall electrification needs. And so it's good to know that, that's not going to be a surprise for them, so that they can address what's going on the infrastructure side early on.
Yeah, we always say to talk with your utility early. We do a lot of work with utilities as well, either with their fleets or with their customer fleets. And the data that we can provide helps not just the fleet know what do they need, but it helps them have the really informed conversation with their utility about what that infrastructure upgrade might need to look like. Maybe not now, but maybe 5 years down the road, so they know what they're getting into.
So is it pretty common for fleets? Like who's a typical customer? What makes the most sense for you? Is it large? Are these anything from little mom and pops all the way to large enterprise municipalities, or what types of groups do you typically work with?
Yeah, all of the above. We've done a lot of work, especially when we got started in the public sector space. So a lot of government fleets, a lot of municipalities and state fleets all around the country. And then we've worked with fleets that have just a few vehicles, all the way up to one of the largest private sector fleets in the country that has more than 30,000 vehicles operating in all states. So everything. But what I think we find is fleets that have 100 to 1,000 to a few thousand are a good sweet spot for us, because they are being asked to electrify. They often don't have the staff on hand to be able to dedicate a lot of time to digging into the data, and they can use our software really quickly to assess that.
I saw a project also, I guess, similarly to maybe this was a supporting project with Verizon late last year. And maybe can you talk a little bit about that? Is that kind of, how does that relate to data acquisition? Was that a customer, or kind of explain that project a little bit? I saw that on the news late last year. It's exciting.
Thank you. So we work that telematics data, right? There's lots of telematics providers. We've built integrations with all the major telematics providers, Verizon being one of them. And that's where that partnership came out of. So we've worked with a number of fleets that use Verizon telematics before that partnership. And now it just makes the data integration easier for fleets that have Reveal or Network Fleet. And they say, hey, we want to do your analysis. It's all set up. It's really easy to go.
Connor, it looked like you were about to jump in there.
No, see, all of these projects are all kind of culminating all at the same time, because when you're looking at kind of the industry as a whole, everyone's going through these same problems, whether they're large or small. Yeah. And it's very interesting to see that there's a solution, which is data. It's always data. And whether you're looking at one vehicle, or you're looking at 10 vehicles, or looking at 100, 1,000, 20,000 vehicles, it always comes back to being able to measure almost on a case-by-case basis, what is the most optimum solution for each individual vehicle. And that's one of the more interesting things, where, you could work with someone who's smaller all the way up to someone who's Verizon as well. And, when you're looking at maybe consulting or having someone do a more manual process to be able to figure out, okay, start with the annual VMT, but it's a more manual process to be able to gather this information and then do a more manual analysis. That's not scalable to today's solution, or today's problem set, where today everyone needs to electrify, and there's some urgency to it. So have you seen kind of a lot of fleets looking at, say, a conventional, more kind of manual analysis, or trying to analyze it themselves, and then kind of the roadblocks that they're running up to, and those roadblocks that your system solves? Have you seen people running into kind of more traditional roadblocks, and how you're able to overcome them?
Definitely. I would say one thing that we see a lot is, how we don't have the time. We need to go through this quickly. Is there a calculator you guys could build for us?
Right.
Can you do it with just our fuel card data? About every 6 months, we sit down internally and we are like, okay, is this something we could do looking at just fuel card data? And we always come back to, we don't then understand what's happened between those fueling events, right? We don't know if they were in stop and go traffic the whole time. We don't know what that midday charging would be. And for us, we think one of the really valuable things that we do is provide information that they can use back to those drivers who maybe have some hesitancy, right? They may say, I can't drive an EV. We see this all the time. And then the fleet manager will say, hey, I can't put an EV in this application. Like my driver's telling me they can't do it. And then when they look at the data, it's actually really fun. We get to have some like aha moments with fleet managers that are thinking of EVs as kind of they were like the early Leaf, right? Or they think of it as maybe a little bit more like a golf cart, not as a vehicle that could meet their daily driving needs. And they'll sit there and say, oh, wait, an EV would work for me. They would need to charge every 3 days. Okay, so this is no problem for my driver. I'm never going to ask them to go find a charger in the middle of whatever route they're driving. And we had one fleet, we were working with a very large fleet. And this was right it must have been about a year and a half ago, where fueling costs were starting to go up, right? And it kept going up and up and up. And so he was feeling really constrained about how to figure out his budget that he had planned for fueling because it was just blown out of the water. And he said, wait, you're telling me I could pretty much plan my fueling budget for every vehicle that's an EV and know what it's going to be within a pretty small range? We said yes. And he was like, that alone makes my job way easier, and had never thought about that with EVs.
Yeah, it's just, the fuel associated with the fleet and the understanding that you have the electricity cost assumptions in hand, and knowing that the fluctuations and price spiking and other things that come along with, fueling a fleet really kind of go away in large part with an electrification effort. I mean, it can be even contractually it could be extended for a fixed price even for a long time, depending on who you're working with in that way. So I guess kind of on the corollary too, there's a lot of examples and a lot of discussion of people thinking about their existing operations and seeing whether or not EVs fit them. But are you guys also able to see, just with the telematics, potential operational changes that might be needed? Is that, kind of like if recognizing when and where, or if, specific kind of like midday, mid-stop charging is required, or what are fleet reactions to that typically?
Yes, and I think it's kind of fun because we're getting to where fleets have gone through the first pilot vehicles, and now they're looking at how do we get the ones that are not just the really easy wins, and that might require some questions around, are there operational changes that we need to make, and what does that look like? There's a few things I want to hit here because we have some really interesting conversations with fleets right now over the past 3 months about this. One is there's a municipal fleet in the Southeast we're working with that is looking at putting in charging hubs around the city, because they have a bunch of vehicles that are now take-home vehicles that weren't previously, and they don't want to bring those drivers back in to have to drive all the way back to a main office facility. But they do want to have them charging at a city-owned facility. So we were able to identify where all of the take-home vehicles are located, how much they would need to charge, and then aggregate that charging demand at these theoretical charging hubs that they haven't yet built, and look at a couple different locations. So they could say, if we put it in the northeast quadrant and we put it right here, that would be 6 of those vehicles. So we would need this many chargers based on how much they need to charge, and build it out that way. And then kind of scenario plan around what does that look like if we do it a few different ways. So that's a potentially big operational change, and they're able to kind of play with it in advance before they make decisions around what that looks like. And it helps them also have conversations, I think, with other stakeholders that would need to be involved: the drivers, facilities staff, their sustainability staff, often, who's kind of pushing hey, we need to get EVs in now. And they're like, well, it's operationally complex, and let's do this the right way. So that's one example, I think, of the operational change. I think another one on a easier basis is just parking at facilities. We see a lot of cases where vehicles will park at opposite sides of a building or opposite sides of a lot, or a few different lots. And this is a really minimal change on paper, but it might be a bigger change to the driver to say, hey, instead of parking at these 4 different locations, we need you to park on the south lot at this parking spot, because this is going to be your spot where you charge. And so having that conversation with drivers and showing them why you need to do that, because we're not going to install infrastructure to support 4 different locations, right? You're going to have to pick one and go. But that's hard, right? Change is hard, 100%.
100%. I totally agree. Sorry, Connor, 1 second. So, yeah, I think we see this in the port tenant space a lot as well, where people are very ingrained, about where they take their lunch breaks. They want to park under that special tree that they have in their they're in their particular fleet vehicle. And so, I think it's really important that the dialogue about electrification really includes everybody. It should include, the operators of the vehicles all the way up to the C-suite, right? And understanding kind of the net benefit to the company. And I think once you have that buy-in from everybody, it feels like the ability to make those changes, those operational changes, a lot easier at the end of the day.
Well, and those operational changes are things that not a lot of people actually think about. Even from employees wanting to park under a special tree, or they have a special spot that has a lot of shade. All of those things kind of go into that plan. But a lot of people, at least that we've been talking to, don't consider a lot of those operational changes as being the foremost problem that they're going to run into. A lot of them, they're still thinking about it as, are the trucks available? Are the trucks going to have enough range? And then getting infrastructure installed, not even looking at it as a site level, but how much is it going to cost to install these chargers? What kind of chargers do I need? What's the lead time? Everyone's talking about, the supply chain delays right now. Those are kind of where a lot of fleets are starting to look at. Are you seeing the same thing with these fleets that are, once they actually look at the data, do they change their tune and say, okay, maybe are there other things that we need to consider? Are there other problems? Are you seeing people gravitate towards one or the other?
I would say yes. I think we hear the same thing. Cost, lead time, infrastructure. Oh my gosh, I haven't talked to my utility yet and I have a vehicle coming, right? Those types of things that happen a little bit more in the first few rounds of buying a vehicle maybe. But the parking data is the one that always blows me away and blows fleets away, because they often expect that a vehicle parks in that one spot that it's assigned to. And it could be as simple as it's parking, like I mentioned, on different sides of a lot or different parts of a campus. And we even see it where a vehicle is assigned to one department, but that department actually has operations at 3 buildings, maybe all across the city or all across a state, and that vehicle actually domiciles an hour away. And you're not asking that person to come back and charge, right? And so unless you get into that data and understand exactly where they're parking, you're blind to it. And so I think we see that kind of aha moment again around like, oh, I didn't know my vehicles did that. Huh. Okay, we'll have to figure out where that is. We also see some funny things that come up where vehicles are parked at a Dunkin' Donuts. And what it happens is, and I bring this up, it was actually a patrol vehicle. So it was really funny. The fleet we were working with, this was a while back, that it was a city or state facility that shared a parking lot with a Dunkin' Donuts. But the way GPS works, sometimes it picks up one address and one name of a business at an address. And the fleet staff was like, oh no, who is parking at a Dunkin' Donuts? We're like, wait, let's just look at the map, right? Like the data is really important, but let's sanity check this a bit and see what's going on.
It's funny. We were talking to a fleet just the other day, and they had a bunch of chargers that they wanted to install. They were looking at kind of panel vans, and they wanted to get a bunch of panel vans electrified, and they went and got a whole bunch of chargers, and I won't say which OEM it was, but they got a whole bunch of chargers, and they came in a box to their office, and they sat there for 3 weeks because no one really knew. The chargers were supposed to have in the ground, and they didn't have the chargers actually installed. They just bought the chargers, and there wasn't enough kind of cohesion with the team where they needed to get the charger. Oh, and they also have to get a contractor to come and install them. So they just came to the office, and they were sitting in the lobby for the longest time. And it's those little things that a lot of people just don't realize once they get into the thick of, looking at the nuances of electrifying, where there's so many little details that kind of come up that a lot of people don't realize when they're kind of doing the big planning. Once you get into the data, once you get into the nitty-gritty details of everything, that's where a lot of the progress can be made if you can simplify that entire process.
I think you hit on something too that's really big. Fleet managers and fleet staff are being asked to do a lot of things that fall outside of the typical purview of what they've had to do in the past. They're being asked to understand electric utility rates. They're being asked to understand how to deal with installing infrastructure that might require an upgrade from your utility. They're being asked to handle fueling budget when someone else is paying the utility bill. All of these things are being put on fleet, and it is a lot to ask of staff that are already fully busy doing their regular job.
Carbon accounting too, right?
Yes.
I mean, often these guys are the ones tasked with trying to how to address a carbon budget or an ESG sustainability goal. You know, that's a lot to throw on any particular person. I totally agree.
Yeah.
So I understand Sawatch Labs, you guys have done work in pretty much every state in the country, I think. So, you know, we often talk about or think about fleet electrification at large happening kind of on the West Coast, you know, and letting things kind of propagate east. But what do you guys know about the industry? It feels like maybe things are happening a little bit faster and more expansive across the board, but we would love some insight from groups that work nationally as to, you know, what you feel like the current state of affairs is as it relates to your kind of work.
Yeah, we see some pockets. Xcel Energy's program, so we support their fleet electrification advisory program, and they're doing a lot to support their customers in the Minnesota and Colorado territories, a little bit in New Mexico, and I think into Wisconsin as well, but primarily in those two. So we see a lot and have done a lot of work with that program and with other fleets directly. In Minnesota, there's a lot of interest in EVs. There's a lot of push in how do we find EVs that work with the cold, extreme climate that we have. There's a lot of infrastructure that's been installed along the corridor. I did say I was from northern Minnesota, so I'm going to speak about this. From northern Minnesota down to Minneapolis and other major routes there, where there's a lot of work that I think people don't expect in the Midwest, where people are doing this. We've also seen a lot in the Southeast, which I think people don't think of for EVs, right?
No, not typically.
No, we've done work Louisiana, in Charlotte, in other places in North Carolina, in Georgia, with the university there in particular, that have been working on this for a long time. And little by little, they've been chipping away. They've been getting vehicles in. They've been helping with trying to get their drivers on board. You know, once you get, especially in a light duty EV, once you get in an EV as a driver and you're like, oh, these are really fun to drive. I can't tell you how many fleet managers I've heard say, I have drivers who are anti-EV. Mm-hmm. I get them in one, and then they come up to me and they say, don't tell anybody, but I really like it. Mm-hmm. So I think we see it happening a lot, and the public sector and the private sector. There's a couple of fleets that we've worked with that one is a liquor delivery fleet. They have a couple liquor stores, and they deliver all around a metro area. And they actually just went EV because they wanted to have EVs. We're going to do this. This is what we're going to have for all of our delivery vehicles. And they did this, must have been 2019-ish, somewhere around there, maybe a little earlier. And in December alone, with 30 vehicles, they did 35,000 miles or something the first year that we started tracking their vehicles. So we have other software. I didn't even talk about Ion EV as one of our software products. Once you have EVs in the fleet, we analyze how they're operating. Are you getting what you thought you were going to get from a savings standpoint, both from a dollar standpoint, but also from a sustainability standpoint? And so for them, we tracked that, and it was astounding, right? They were using Chevy Bolts and Teslas. They weren't using big delivery vans. They were delivering to houses or maybe some small businesses, and just their savings were through the roof because the amount of miles that they do. And they were always coming back to the facility to charge. And it was great. There was a liquor, a small batch brewery in Ohio that we worked with a long time ago. And it would work great for them. They did the same type of delivery. They didn't need big vehicles. They needed small cars where they could put a couple kegs or a couple other things in and deliver them, driving a lot of miles, like ideal scenario, and saves them a lot of money. And they're a small business where it really matters, right? Being able to save a little bit on fuel, even when fuel costs were low, for them worked great.
Get some regenerative braking with those heavy kegs
exactly.
in the back of the tank.
Exactly. I know every time Lagunitas is based in the I'm in Petaluma, California right now. And every time I drive behind a small, they have a couple Transit Connects. And I'm like, I just wish there was an electric Connect here. Like I don't sell cars. I could sell that to so many fleets right now. Yeah. But someday.
It's a separate line of business down the road.
Completely.
Yeah. So it kind of sounds like, doing the work nationally, it really sounds like with the analytics in hand, the data in hand, and being able to justify and understand operationally what's happening, as well as all of the other kind of services you provide, it's really less kind of policy and incentive based. It sounds like a lot of people are really just seeing the bottom line here as being a beneficial in the fuel swap just alone. across the board, and it's probably less, policy driven or incentive driven nationally.
Definitely. Initially, the fleets we're working with, it was policy driven. We have to have 200 EVs in our fleet by 2020, and that was really most of the fleets we worked with. Connor and I have talked about this. We have fleets that initially, when they come to us and we're scoping out the project, they're like, can you put incentives in? Can you tell me what this would look like? Yes, we can do that. Without fail, every fleet we've worked with has not wanted us to include incentives when we actually do the total cost of ownership analysis because of uncertainty around longevity of those rebates and other incentives being available. So they always say, nope, I want to run it without that. And what I would like to see is what it's going to be if there were no incentives. And if I get incentives, I get rebates, I'm going to call that icing on the cake. I'm going to make this decision without it. I think that the low carbon fuel standard and other clean fuel programs are a different thing. And we're working to educate our fleets on that based on conversations that I've had with Connor. Has been really, really helpful in explaining some of that to us to really help fleets understand what that revenue could look like and the consistency around it. But I'm always surprised. It's not the incentives now at the stage we're at for many of the fleets.
Feels like a good tipping point, yeah.
It really is. And, that was always the most surprising thing to me is that a lot of these fleets are saying, they're not even including it anymore because they can't predict which grants are going to be available, how much money, are they even going to get them? It makes sense now kind of in retrospect, but for the longest time, everyone was looking at saying, okay, the only way we could get EVs out into the kind of the mass market was always to incentivize the heck out of them. Yeah. So the more incentives we could get, the more people would actually start to go and buy them. But now we're actually seeing where, the total cost of ownership is reaching parity in a reasonable amount of time without these, incentives. And the fact that fleets are actually starting to consider them as, it's a financially advantageous decision to make, that policy-driven ecosystem that we were expecting to last for a long, long time is still going to be there, but there's, a lot more attributes that are starting to come into the fold that are really going to kind of catalyze that adoption over the next kind of 5-10 years, where people are going to go, oh, I could save X amount of dollars over the life of my vehicles. If I'm going to lease them or rent them for, say, 5 years, I could actually save money on this and still improve my operational efficiency. That's kind of a slam dunk.
Yeah,
for a lot of fleets.
Certainly. I think definitely in the light duty side. I think medium duty and heavy duty, the incentives are driving adoption more just because of the cost of those vehicles. That will maybe change as more and more models are available. I think the other hesitancy that fleets are seeing in terms of including those rebates is because of the lead times on vehicles. Even if I wanted the vehicle now and I put in for it, by the time I get the vehicle 2 years from now on the medium duty, heavy duty side, am I going to be able to apply for that rebate? Is that going to work out right? And it also ties back to what you said, Todd, a little bit about fleet staff not being able to track their emissions. They then also have to apply for those rebates. And that is a whole other task that someone else has to do on top of managing a fleet.
Right.
One of the things that we've been talking about before as well is that the ability for your platform to actually provide recommendations for that, where if fleets actually looking at all of these incentives, or if they're just looking at which vehicles that they should electrify, that your platform can actually provide a recommendation on a specific route, on saying, okay, these are the types of vehicles that would be a really good use case for that particular route. Can you talk a little bit about how that actually works, and kind of if a fleet, say, wanted to analyze a very specific vehicle, say that they've been buying Fords for 20 years and they want to continue buying Fords, can you actually analyze a specific route and say, okay, that Ford Transit that we're running, if there's an electric one, can it actually run that same route? Can you actually do that?
Yeah, and I would say it's not even the route, right? It's because it's every minute. So we're looking at, can it do all the driving it needs to do 365 days a year? And if it can't, which days could that e-transit not do what your gas-powered transit is doing? And by how much could it not do that, right? It would need a little top up. And maybe you're okay twice a year with your drivers finding a place and having a snack and trying to figure out when to top up a little bit to get home. Or maybe you're not, or maybe it's once a week, right? So we're looking at every specific model and saying, of the available models in this class that you would consider purchasing, to your point, if you're buying Ford, we're just going to look at Ford models. Which one of these would fit, if any would? And if they do, which one is the best fit from an economic standpoint as well as an operational standpoint. We have here's the best fit, but then you can easily go in the software and say, I don't know about that. I think I want to see it with something else. And you can do the drop down and it will just automatically update the scores. And you could see why we identified the other one as the best fit. We see this a lot on fleets in the pickup or even like sedan side where a driver might have a preference. I really wanted that vehicle. How come that vehicle is not a good fit? Well, the fleet manager can go and say, well, like, this is why this vehicle is the best fit. We would save 5% from a TCO standpoint. If we replace it with the one that you prefer, it's actually a little bit more expensive. It could still do maybe all of the daily driving, but it would maybe cost us a little bit more than that ICE, or the battery capacity is lower and it actually couldn't do it and you would have to do midday charging. So we're going to throw you in this one. So we try to provide that data and that output that allows people to answer those questions too, because a lot of questions come up once you say, here's the best fit. You want to know maybe why something else wasn't.
Not to mention the space and the technologies that are being deployed, evolve so quickly. They kind of need that level of guidance early on, so that when they're forward thinking and trying to stay abreast of upcoming news and new models and stuff, just by looking at this now, and they have some understanding of why one model might be better than another, they can kind of extrapolate that idea, into the future a little bit. So just kind of want to go back to the software side a little bit. Just curious. Let's put an example fleet in your hands here. So a beer and beverage distributor. This is going back on theme.
It's Friday, right?
It's Friday. They have a handful of facilities throughout the United States, and are looking to transition some box trucks and some light duty vehicles in the 100 to 200 unit range. How do they engage with Sawatch Labs? Do they just sign on to a platform? Is it kind of a direct engagement with some of your team, or how does the kind of interaction work? Just looking for a little clarity on kind of how fleets work with you guys.
Yeah. So the first thing we do is, get under contract. But then we do an onboarding call. And what we like to do is, really get an understanding of the fleet, get access to their telematics data. Now, what that usually means is they just have to set us up as a user, and then we pull all that data via API. And I say that because I think that the data transfer part can be really, really cumbersome otherwise, but we pull it in and we can look back and pull historical data, usually up for a year, depends a little bit on the telematics provider. And then we can also pull data in every single day moving forward. So it's a great way to do an analysis on your last year, but also always know what's happening as your operations change. And like you said, Todd, as the new vehicles become available, right? We put new vehicles in our software model all the time, and they will just pop up in your dashboard if that is a vehicle that you would consider purchasing. And then from there, once we get their dashboard set up, we run them through a quick overview of how they walk through it. We look at a number of their vehicles. We look high level of the vehicles we've seen so far. Which ones are a good fit? What does this look like for your fleet? Where are you going to need charging? All of that. So we run through all of that, someone on our team. And then monthly, we do a quick check-in call. Hey, there's this new model that came out. Is this something you would consider purchasing? Can we throw it in your software? Yeah, that would be great. Throw it in. Okay. Oh no, we will not. Don't add that one. We don't want to see it, right? We have some interest in the Mercedes Sprinter van, not yet available, but we have a lot of fleets that have cargo vans, and they're just trying to see what options exist. So we do tend to throw that one in for most fleets. And then when gas prices change, if something else changes, we've set it up to make it really easy for us to change those custom settings and run it. You can run scenarios. You could say, I want to see what it's going to be like if gas prices are $3.50 a gallon. I want to see what it's going to be like if they go up to $6 a gallon, and which vehicles now make sense and which don't. So I can kind of figure out what that looks like moving forward in the future under different scenarios.
That's super exciting. So that's all kind of encompassed with ezEV, right? For the most part. And then do you feel like that year-long history, hopefully, potentially longer than that gives you guys a lot of context on any particular business to suggest or to, integrate suggestions or work through the process? Or do you feel like you have to kind of get several more months of data in hand before being able to really implement any sort of kind of, decisions?
We need at least 90 days of data at a minimum.
Oh, that's pretty short, actually.
It is. So, and what we found is that gives us a good idea of when a vehicle is taking a long trip. You know, what did that look like when they have weeks maybe where they don't drive very much? A year is ideal and great. That allows us to capture seasonality, you know, and not just from the temperature standpoint, because that's of course important, but also we see a lot of fleets, their operations change seasonally.
Yeah, totally.
They, in the winter months in northern climates, drivers tend to come back and do any office paperwork in the office. In the summer months, they might do it in the car and be parked idling, you know, to condition the cab, but enjoying being outside-ish a little bit. So we see that change a lot, and it really does impact then when those vehicles would charge and what that kind of looks like when they're coming back to the facility. Collecting data moving forward, in our mind, allows you to really understand what's changing as your operations change. Like fleet is coming to fleet. I thought of fleet as being much more stable, right? Someone gets a vehicle, the department gets a vehicle, that's where it is, that's where it stays. Vehicles move around a ton. I don't need to tell anybody here listening to this podcast that that's the case, but it's not stable. And so there's a lot of benefit in tracking that data moving forward so that when you're making procurement decisions for next year, you're understanding what's actually going on now rather than referencing maybe a report that's 2 years old where your vehicles could be doing all kinds of things different.
For those listening right now, they're probably hearing about these kinds of analyses for the first time. How do you actually gather that data? So all of those telematics data that you're gathering from those vehicles, how do you actually gather that for, you know, submission to you guys to actually do the analysis?
Yeah, we're pulling it programmatic because they're pulling it via API, which means they set up a user in their telematics dashboard and for us, and then we can pull it. And they don't have to do anything else. So usually it's about a 5-minute process, start to finish, as long as you know who sets up users in your dashboard. Sometimes that takes a little bit of effort.
It sounds like you guys, you know, have pretty your hands around pretty much every major telematics provider out there. Yeah. So, you know, I think you've outlined ezEV and ezIO really well. What's the post electrified fleet technology, ezWatts or something?
As Ion EV, which we
EV.
used to support the EVWatts project. So
that was what I was thinking. That's close. Okay.
Very close. Yes, that's a Department of Energy funded project that we support, assessing vehicles, how they're operating, EVs, how they're operating in the wild all around the country, both fleets and individual consumers. It's really cool. I'll put a plug in for it because they're trying to get data on how EVs are operating to help researchers and OEMs and everyone figure out what else do we need to help support this ecosystem. It's kind of a cool project to be a part of.
That's super exciting. Well, I mean, just those 3 products alone sound like enough to chew on and have a lot of tailwinds in their potential. But just kind of bringing this full circle here, what do you see on the horizon for both these maybe individual products or for Sawatch Labs in general? Where are you guys kind of headed with the continued involvement of what you guys are doing?
Yeah, there's one other product that's really exciting that we've built out and have up with fleets now and are continuing to expand called EMIT. And this gets to that emissions tracking. And I think, Todd, it was you who said, you know, that now fleets are having to report on their sustainability metrics. And so we're trying to be the easy button. You can just download a report monthly, have it automated, emailed to you, where you have your emissions across all your vehicles, regardless of fuel type. And here's what my actual emissions were. And then we do a analysis in there that says, you've put EVs in 10 applications, maybe in your fleet. Had you instead, when you purchase those EVs, had you instead purchased gas-powered vehicles, what would your emissions have been? Right. So it's a good way and a quick way to say, here's what your actual savings would have been. Right. We see a lot of fleets that are being asked to do it based on miles or fuel use. And they're like, look, my operations are changing. Like that's again, not a good metric for me to have as a baseline to compare to. So we really like this ability to make it easy for fleets, hopefully to say, here you go. I met what I needed to do for my sustainability side. It's done. See you next month. We'll go from there. And then we're adding more and more functionality across all the products from a scenario running standpoint, where we're just making it easier and easier for the users to go in and change those settings and say, I want to see it with $3 a gallon. Right now, we do that internally on our side. It's a quick process. It takes just a couple minutes to run, but we're exposing those tools to our clients so that they can go ahead and run that side by side and say, hey, look, from a sustainability planning standpoint, what does this look like? From a procurement standpoint, what does this look like, and what's going to impact my budget, and how do I do this with all of this uncertainty in the world.
Right, really putting the what if scenario controlling into the fleet's hands, and I think you're totally right. As a lot of fleet and procurement managers and CFOs of the world that are involved in the transportation, electrification side of things, become more and more educated about what impacts all of this, giving them the controls to manage and make those assumptions and play around with it. I think is going to be increasingly important moving in the future.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that one.
Very exciting. Well, Sarah, this has been super great. I think that you guys have a fantastic set of platforms and clearly an extremely high level of expertise in the EV space on all things. And I think the underlying principle here is that it all just really starts with the data and that you can do a lot with it. And coming from the building side with the ezIO, but certainly with the telematics access, you can really do a lot of future proofing, future planning, and understanding of your carbon emissions and all sorts of manner of things with the tools that you guys have brought to the table. So thank you for showcasing that with us today. If someone wants to get a little bit more information about Sawatch Labs and or you, where's a good place to point them to?
They could email me directly. It's fine. It's Booth, my last name, BOOTH, @sawatchlabs.com. Obviously, go to our website, sawatchlabs.com as well. And glad to connect and answer any questions that might be helpful. Thank you guys for having me. I was telling you, it's my first podcast. This was great. You made it nice and easy, and it's a nice conversation to have. I really appreciate being here.
Cool. Well, we hope to have you back soon. And thank you very much, Sarah. Appreciate you coming on to the Charge Cycle.
Yeah, thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thanks. And to the listener, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Charge Cycle. Connor, thank you for co-hosting this week.
Thanks for having me again.
And we'll see you guys all next time. Until then, get out there and get plugged in.